Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are diving deep into one of the most popular and maybe one of the most confusing words in the wine world, minerality. You see it everywhere. You hear people talk about it, but what on earth does it actually mean?
So let's just get right to the heart of it. When somebody says a wine is mineral, are you supposed to be tasting the actual rocks and dirt that the grapes grew in? I mean, it's a cool idea, right? But the reality, well, it's a whole lot more interesting.
So before we can really bust that myth, we got to get on the same page. What are people even talking about when they use this word minerality?
Just look at some of these descriptions. We're not talking about berries or vanilla here. People are describing things like flint or firestone, chalk, graphite, that salty tang of sea salt, or, my personal favorite, that smell of wet stone right after it rains. It's a totally different world of flavor.
And that right there is the key. Minerality isn't one single specific taste. It's more of a feeling, a perception. It's this whole collection of smells and flavors and even textures that just makes our brain think of the mineral world. So yeah, it's super subjective and personal.
All right, let's tackle this head on. If we're not actually tasting rocks, then what in the world is going on between the dirt on the ground and the wine in your glass? You know, the simple myth on the left is that a grapevine is basically a straw. It just sucks up these mineral flavors directly from the soil into the grape, but the reality, over on the right, is way cooler. A vine is like a little biochemical factory. It pulls up mineral nutrients, sure, but then its own metabolism completely transforms them into brand new compounds that create aroma and flavor.
Think of it like this. Minerals like potassium and calcium are the building blocks for the vine. They're essential for its health. They don't give the wine a potassium flavor, but they do influence things like acidity and sugar levels, and that is what shapes the final tastes and textures that we call mineral.
So, if we're not tasting the rocks, where do these flinty, sulky, chalky sensations come from? Well, as it turns out, it's a real team effort.
Yeah, the feeling of minerality comes from a bunch of places. It starts with how the soil affects the grape's health, but it also involves very specific organic compounds in the wine itself, like things called thiols, which are directly linked to those smoky gunflint smells. Then you've got tiny microorganisms, like the native yeasts that live on the grapes, which add their own local character. And of course, there's the winemaker, who can choose to either play up these qualities or cover them up.
And this is where the human touch really matters. A winemaker who wants to show off that minerality might ferment in stainless steel tanks to keep everything crisp and pure. Or they might use those indigenous yeasts to really get a sense of place. But on the flip side, using a lot of new oak barrels or leaving the juice on the skins for a long time can bring in these big, powerful flavors that totally hide those delicate stony notes.
Okay, enough with the theory. The best way to really get this is to taste it. So let's go on a quick world tour of some places that are famous for their mineral-driven wines.
Our first stop is the gorgeous Loire Valley in France. This is pretty much the spiritual home of Sauvignon Blanc and a textbook example of minerality.
So here, in famous spots like Sancerre, the vines are growing in this really unique soil called silex, which is packed with flint. And no surprise, the wines from here are famous for this intense gunflint or firestone smell. It's a perfect example of that soil-to-sensation connection.
Staying in France, let's pop over to Chablis. This is where Chardonnay shows off a totally different, much stonier side of its personality.
The secret sauce in Chablis is the Kimmeridgian soil. It's basically ancient limestone that's just loaded with fossilized sea creatures. And that gives the wine its zippy, high acidity and a texture that people almost always describe as chalky or like crushed oyster shells.
Okay, now we're heading east to Germany, to the incredibly steep slopes of the Mosel Valley, which is home to some of the most amazing Riesling on the planet.
The vineyards here basically just cling to the sides of these hills of dark slate. That slate soaks up the sun to help ripen the grapes, and it gives the wines this classic wet stone or graphite aroma. It's this cool, stony character that perfectly balances the wine's acidity.
And for our last stop, let's go somewhere completely different. We're off to the stunning volcanic island of Santorini in Greece.
I mean, how wild is this? The native Assyrtiko grape grows in pure black volcanic ash. The wines are just electric. They have this buzzing acidity and an unmistakable saline or salty quality, almost like sea spray, sometimes with a little hint of smoke. You're literally tasting the island.
Okay, so now you know the science behind it all. But how do you actually find these qualities when you've got a glass of wine in your hand? Let's break down how to taste for minerality.
Here's a super simple 3-step guide. First, focus on what you smell. Swirl that glass and try to look past the fruit. Do you smell anything like wet rocks or chalk? Second, think about the texture. How does it feel in your mouth? Is it sharp, focused, maybe even a little gritty? And third, pay attention to the finish. That mouth-watering, slightly salty feeling that just hangs around, that is a classic sign of minerality.
And you know what? These wines are absolutely incredible with food. The all-time classic pairing is oysters, where that salty note in the wine just perfectly matches the brininess of the oyster. The high acidity is also amazing for cutting through creamy goat cheese. And really, for any light, fresh dish, a mineral wine acts just like a squeeze of fresh lemon, making everything brighter.
So we'll leave you with this to think about. Is minerality something real that comes from the earth? Or is it this brilliant, complex story that's told through chemistry, biology, and our own senses? You know, maybe the magic is that it's a little bit of both. Thanks for joining me for this one.